We're Thinking Space, and we're a non-profit, and we create opportunities for people to come together to talk about philosophical issues. And tonight's workshop is a free workshop on environmental ethics in the environment. And I'll say that a bit again. So tonight's workshop is a free public philosophy workshop, ethics in the environment, and it's an opportunity for people who are interested in the environment, perhaps skeptical or confused about environmental issues, to come together and explore the philosophical dimension of all of this stuff. So we hear a lot about letting science speak for itself when it comes to the climate, but actually there are a whole host of issues to do with what we value, what we care about, what really matters, how we're supposed to live with an uncertain future ahead of us, and this is a chance for people to explore some of those with us. My name is Grace Lockrobin, and I am a sort of philosopher for hire. That's Charlie's wrecking the place. So I lead a little non-profit called Thinking Space, and together I've got my colleagues Jane, who help you register, and Elliott. And in some capacity or other, for the last 12 years or so, we've been looking at ways that we can help the public have conversations about things that are important to them or important to the world, or both. And a lot of that work has been in schools. So I've got actually some of my colleagues who do a lot of philosophy in schools have come along this evening, but also work in other settings, open workshops like this, where we try and explore issues that seem really pressing and really important. And this workshop tonight we're putting on for free, and I'm really grateful to my colleagues for volunteering to do this, especially Elliott, because it's his birthday today. Happy birthday. We're doing it for free because, yeah, we think this stuff, philosophical conversations about the philosophical issues that come out of the climate crisis, are too pressing to wait for somebody to fund. So we're just going to get on and do it, and we're grateful that at least a few people agree and have come. Thanks, Helen. A couple of things about the way we'll run things tonight, because if you come to an event like this, you might not really know what to expect. One of the ways that Thinking Space understands philosophy is something that's practiced, so something you participate in. So if tonight was only a talk by me or by somebody who was really very knowledgeable about environmental philosophy, that wouldn't really speak to the way that we like to do things, because you guys could have easily have left without doing any philosophy at all. So this is a really participative session. Most of the issues raised are going to be raised by you, and any tentative solutions proposed will be proposed by you largely. So I hope you're feeling in good voice and feel up for that. Issues around the climate involve an awful lot of technical, scientific, political, economic language and vocabulary, and that can exclude people sometimes. I find it excludes me sometimes, a lot of the time. So if you're able to, if you're particularly knowledgeable about this topic because you've got a background in philosophy and that brings technical language, or you're a scientist, or you're an expert for another reason, well, you try and make your language as inclusive as possible. So just explain what you mean, or translate into simple English if you can. That'll help people feel like they can participate and not feel like they don't know what's going on. And also, I guess we need to be quite concise tonight. We've got an hour and 45 minutes and then a bit of feedback. It's not very long. So if our facilitators tonight encourage you gently, or hopefully not, we'll need to do it not so gently, to sort of wrap up or get on with it or give someone else a go, please take that in the spirit with which it was intended. It's just about getting as many people to be able to participate as possible. You've already been told we're filming, and everybody's blue badge indicates that they're okay with that. So I don't need to mention that, I guess. Okay, so I want to start this workshop about ethics in the environment somewhere other than the head. I want us to think about the significance of our feelings about the environment. And perhaps for some of you, this will raise some questions about whether our emotions have got anything to do with a discussion of philosophical ethics about the environment. But what I want you to do is just to think about how you felt today about the environment. And I would like you to think about where you find yourself at this particular moment today between hopefulness, and despair. Okay, and we're going to try and map out exactly where we find ourselves. Because we've got a continuum above your heads. We've got hope and despair. Here they are. Hope and despair. I'll switch it back to hope. I would like you to position yourself somewhere along this continuum. You're just thinking of taking a snapshot of where you stand right now. And whoever you find standing nearby you, just talk to them for a few minutes about why it is you find yourself there. Is there anything specific about right now that can explain why you find yourself in that place between hope and despair? If there's something specific, what is it? Okay? So feel free to move a bit of furniture if that makes it easier, but get yourself standing somewhere between hope and despair, please. This is our little icebreaker. Thank you. Sorry if not everyone had a chance to speak, but we're about to move this forward slightly. Okay, so you're gonna work with either Jane, Elliott, or I, and all we need is 3 equal-ish size groups, so just move towards somebody. You might want to leave the people you came with and join a different group, or if that makes you feel, then don't. It's up to you. But yeah, we'll go and gravitate towards someone, and then we'll tell you what's going to happen next.
When you're thinking about the future and with the kind of ongoing climate crisis, kind of loads of questions, but yeah, with these sort of ongoing climate issues, where did you place yourself, and how did you feel? Were you hoping or despairing?
So the question is, was I feeling hoping or despairing?
Yeah. I mean, maybe give a brief explanation as to why.
So I was sort of in equal measure, but then going towards despairing. And what it came down to for me is where you focus on the issue and how you focus on the issue. So, like looking at the climate crisis globally, or like I was saying, looking at a very large nation like the USA, felt to me to be almost impossible because there's just so many different factors involved and so many kind of constraints that you couldn't possibly deal with the issue head on in one sort of way. You'd have to deal with the issue and appease so many people, and to an extent that almost seems impossible to come up with a strategy that's going to appeal to so many different domains. So that's why you sort of veer towards despair, but then you focus on these smaller things and you focus on more simplistic things, and you are hopeful because you think, well, these basic things like the right to water is surely everything that's is common between everybody. So cool. That's more hopeful. Everybody wants.
So I was a similar, so like slightly veering towards despair, and that was because I personally don't think that really we have much capacity to make a massive change at this point in time. But then I was saying in our conversation that actually I don't know if that matters in terms of like the really, really long run. If everything was to shit and like people die out, that's probably going to be better for the planet. So I don't know if that's a bad thing, because like all previous mass extinctions, like something's around, life keeps going, so that might be okay. But so after our conversation, I think actually I'm going to make myself either hopeful or despairing. I don't think I'm on that spectrum because I know how much capacity there is for change, and I don't think despairing is going to help anyone.
Did anyone have a non-despairing viewpoint?
I think we're all, as we said,
Okay.
All happy.
Thank you both. I'm just going to show you some quotes now, and perhaps we can think about them together and see if that sort of perhaps might change any of our views, or in fact, as it may be, reinforce our views. So I've got one here from Ban Ki-moon, who is I think it was the head of the UN General Assembly, the 66th one, I believe. So he says, saving our planet, lifting people out of poverty, advancing economic growth, those are one and satisfied. We must connect the dots between climate change, water scarcity, energy shortages, global health, food security, and women's empowerment. Solutions to one problem must be solutions for all. We can pass them around as well, so we can close a look. Garrett Hardin, who we can find out a little bit more about later. Ruin is the destination towards which all men rush, each pursuing his own best interests in a society that believes in freedom in the commons. Freedom in the commons brings ruin to all. Some of these aren't quotes, they are in fact graphs. So this year has seen more than double the number of fires in Brazil in 2020. I've got a classic Trump tweet here as well. The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make US manufacturing more competitive. And finally, we've got one by David Attenborough. I think there's a stronger movement in this country, and indeed worldwide, a stronger recognition of how important the natural world is than there ever has been in my lifetime. So, thinking about some of these following examples, you can think of one, or maybe you can think about either of them. Does any of these sort of make you feel more or less hopeful, or more or less despairing, I suppose?
Even if you think I find this quite depressing. I don't know.
Depressing?
Yeah. So it says, saving our planet, lifting people out of poverty. So those first two bits sound pretty good, can't disagree with them. And then he says advancing economic growth, so he's coupling them onto it. These are one and the same fight. Now, I don't agree, and I think that this growing economy is mainly the main problem that we're facing. It's trying to have a growing economy. So, I don't agree with his statement. I guess that's one thing. So it makes me despairing because this is an important person in guiding the direction of the world, and I feel that he's coming at it from blind. This world is being led by people who are trying to almost solve an unsolvable Rubik's Cube. I fear that we might not be able to save our planet and lift people out of poverty.
Okay.
This one makes me despair even more. I think the one about the fires in Brazil, I was really impressed when the new president came in power. Because it's one country that controls the vast area, which we all live in, so that's all game's over. So that's very helpful.
Proposal, and I've tried to almost not read it because anything Donald Trump tweets, I think giving any kind of credit to it is fuel to the fire and really irritating. But at the same time, Donald Trump is the President of the United States, and he has a certain level of power in terms of the initiatives and the schemes that he can adhere to in terms of the climate. And if the President of the United States is tweeting that global warming is some sort of conspiracy or whatever, that to me is quite despairing. So like talking about huge nations, when you're looking at the leader, and it's a tweet that is saying that's uncomfortable.
I think the Icebreaker quote actually makes me feel a little bit more positive. Try not to poke because and when I think about the environment, I often think about the really long term, and like you were saying, more specific examples or like the general trend. Like so Attenborough says that there's more things happening now than everyone's going to I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, then that's nothing but a good thing. Even if it doesn't make any difference in the end, that's still right, and like the world's better.
That's interesting because perhaps your point earlier, I don't know, would you agree with what might, is there anything anyone might like to say?
Well, I don't know. If I got that last bit right, you say the world is a better place because people are aware of the natural world being important.
Yeah. Even if it's only a
it's
tiny
not.
bit, I think it's a start, isn't it? Some sort of positive trend, maybe.
A positive trend, yeah. Like when I read this one, the David Attenborough one, I guess what I sort of looked at it and I thought, well, him saying, I think there is a stronger movement in this country and indeed worldwide right now than there ever has been. I'd be like, well, if there wasn't, we'd be in serious trouble because science progresses, doesn't it? And we should have a better understanding today of how important the natural world is than there has ever been before, partly because it's so under threat now. But please.
But I suppose it's coming down to perspective in terms of how you view something like that, because I suppose in one way it could be kind of just empty inspiration, but I think the point is you kind of got to focus on whatever we have now as opposed to like what we haven't done previously. I suppose continuing to look back is just going to, I mean, hopefully we can learn something from it, but beyond that there is nothing we can do about non-action. We can't change the non-action. We can act differently in the future, but there's nothing we can do to change the non-action to make sense. You have to take that quote and be inspired by the fact that at least something has changed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So at least it's kind of the perspective.
Is anyone who hasn't spoken
So I was just trying to balance between those two. I think there's an argument about capacity. So as you were saying...
So sorry, could you say that again?
Capacity.
Capacity.
So as you were saying, science takes us to this point now, and I think it does take us to this point now where we know more about the natural world than we ever did, where we have more options technologically to pursue things that are less damaging to the environment than we ever did. There's things like, I'll take one example, so the level of pollution in rivers in the UK used to be absolutely terrible, and they were able to reverse some of that, and there are now things living in rivers that would have been unthinkable in the 1970s when actually pollution was at a certain level. There were alternatives that were found to CFC gases and leaded petrol and that sort of thing. The capacity is there, but I think people don't want to engage with that. And I think the thing that brings me to despair is things like that Donald Trump tweet. It's very convenient to just go with somebody who will just tell you that all of it's a lie, you don't have to change anything, you can have all those material factors. I think if everybody turned around tomorrow and said, we don't want a part of this, it would be completely possible to fix quite a lot of it, to reverse some things, but I don't think people want that. I think they're very happy to go with leaders who will tell them things that are not true, and that they probably know are true, but it allows them to continue, and I think then that goes back to that, if you've got freedom in the commons, then you can just do whatever you like, and it's not for the good of the whole.
So, has anyone's opinion changed based on our short discussion? No, you're all still feeling quite despairing? Yeah? Okay, I think we're going to wrap up and go back to the main group now. And thank you all, this was a really good...
I'd like to say that maybe my opinion has changed from listening to you both, because I struggle, I think, with being a bit too negative, and I do want that. And so listening to your message about how, you know, you can't change the inaction, but sort of looking at this as hopeful, and that the world is a better place through this change move. Well, I think that's good for me to hear, because I'm quite cynical. And so,
this is quite an interesting point that you just made, is that you kind of you mentioned that perhaps you're too negative. So I think what we're going to move on to a discussion now is what's the kind of most reasonable position to hold, whether or not hope or what role hope versus reason, hope versus despair, which of these is the kind of rational response to the kind of climate that we're in now. So that's something to bear in mind now that we start thinking about the role of hope and despair. I think we're ready to go back into the movie.
Thank you for those initial conversations. It would be really nice to hear from a few people. So we've got a little dictaphone which will help record, so I'll pass this to whoever will start. But I'll just use my privilege to invite the people who were in my group to speak first, if that's okay, because they're expecting it. I just want a snippet of something interesting. Perhaps your facilitator will nominate someone. Something interesting that you think the whole group might find provocative or helpful. Do you want to start? Does someone from our group want to start? Go on, Rosie.
So one of the things we talked about in our group was the distinction between hope and despair as feelings and the possibility of them rather being a practice, so that taking action to practice being hopeful was different than simply feeling hope, but felt like a positive driver towards better things, I guess. But we said other things too.
Yeah, let's hear from another person in our group. Maybe one of you guys would speak. Theo, will you have a go?
We also spoke about how hope and despair could be thought of as more sort of innate emotions, but there are rationalisations of those, and perhaps in the forms of optimism and pessimism, which sound quite similar to hope and despair, but there seems to be a quite important difference.
Say a little bit more about how did the group, perhaps you will have a go, Steve, how did the group start differentiating optimism and pessimism from hope and despair? Do you remember?
Not sure we did get to that, but perhaps thought, pessimism maybe was some sort of rational calculation based on probability, as was optimism, and that you could be pessimistic but also hopeful. And that hope gave the opportunity. I mean, I was pro-hope, so I'm speaking for. So, hope in the face of a pessimistic calculation did give the opportunity for you to either make a positive contribution to, things, or even just to sort of be able to carry on living and live as well as you can, So, hope is in your terms, Rosie, a good practice, I think. and maybe it's an emotion and maybe a practice. So you could get to be hopeful by trying to be hopeful, a bit like love. You could practice love, but love is also a feeling, an emotion rather.
There was a suggestion that attending today was a form of practicing hope, which I thought was quite poetical. Thank you very much. Is there another group, another person who contribution, Elliott or Jane, that you think kind of like connects in some way to that? That might be a place to go next.
We did talk about, we spent the beginning talking about very similar ideas and very similar ideas about the importance of hope, but we also talked a bit about despair. Would you two mind sharing with the group what you said about despair?
I think what we were talking about really is having a background knowledge in this kind of area of environment and conservation, particularly from a kind of biodiversity angle. I think it's something that you can end up feeling despair because you have quite a kind of in-depth knowledge about it. So it's quite hard to kind of see hope when you've kind of got that kind of knowledge, and kind of constantly kind of updated most recent kind of scientific research and kind of
how many animals are disappearing?
Yeah, you're kind of constantly kind of updated by those type of statistics. So it's something that as I say, like it's quite hard to kind of battle with kind of hope and despair, but also having a kind of personal interest and a kind of passion for the environment and wanting to kind of conserve wildlife and the environment. It kind of pushes you to kind of continue working in this sector and wanting to make a difference. And in some ways, it's, I would say, I don't know if it's exactly a hope, but it's something that kind of, as you said, kind of like a empathy and compassion. And compassion that kind of makes you kind of like pushes you in that direction and want to, it kind of drives you in that way. So
you're the second group to make this really tight connection between hope and action that came out really strongly in our group, and then this description of this connection in your work, in your contribution. Rosie was talking about kind of like hope as a practice, and there was a suggestion that I raised from our group that you could behave in hopeful ways, practice hope, without feeling it. If you experience in your expertise this kind of onslaught of information that kind of serves to weaken that, does that resonate at all, Rosie's suggestion for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think it does. I think that's quite a good way of putting it, actually. I haven't really thought about it in that way, but we're acting in a hopeful way and kind of doing kind of hopeful things in a sense, but actually deep down, kind of not really feeling it. And it's something that I think it's quite predominant in the kind of like conservation sector, people working in that kind of that area that on a daily basis will kind of feel it and want to kind of promote hope, but it's something that you kind of do experience. So
that's a good point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was more to do with three things. It's the language we use, and it's and also how we represent that language in visual images, and also the third is the essential part is interaction with another, but not through social media, because that's where the massive abuse is now growing now, and people are just, it's just awful. It's really awful when you hear the stories that are going on with especially young girls, more than it seems to be more with young women. And that's what worries me, is even, you gotta have the right language, the language that's gonna interact with another person, but it has to be visual, like a visual image, like you have, I like that you've put that image, up there. It doesn't seem very hopeful to me, but the image, but anyway, it's another.
It's actually hope in a prison of despair.
I see.
So there's hope and despair in that image. We have to have hopeful imagery and the right kind of language and stuff in order to what?
In order to get another person to understand, say, the crisis that's going on, but these are people who are in disbelief or are denying or are confused. There's a lot of confusion now because of the misinformation. So how do we get, what does one increase of one the increase in temperature mean? Or in your own home, what does it mean to lower your temperature of your boiler or your heating? And we need often people can't understand their heating bill and how they're paying. There's those things that need to be simplified and made easier for people to understand how their house lives, how they live in the world, in their home.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, I'll stop there.
I'm going to pause you there so we can hear from the third group. But this person who's come in, would you like to join us? Are you happy there?
Can I just ask one thing of that group? Because I was really interested in that you were talking about compassion as a driver, but not. And so I'm interested in whether despair is not a driver to action at all, but compassion is, and then you get hope from the action.
I think so. Yeah, I believe despair can also be kind of a driver towards action, but I suppose you also need compassion and empathy and something to look forward to.
Yeah.
To act.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
So I think it is wonderful to hear the discussion that's been going on. I think it's high level, and I think it's something that we've touched on in a slightly different way in our group. We talked a lot about sort of our own intuitions and how the sources prompted us to either feel the same or feel different ways. But I think these issues did come up. One of the issues that we talked about in invoking sort of feelings of despair was how vast these problems seem, and I think one of the things we spoke about was the sort of the difficulty of being able to sort of wade through the amount of problems that are inherent in the crisis, and the sort of inability to actually sort of conceive of it actually being part of the cause of despair. But we had an interesting conversation about towards the end, where we talked about feeling too despairing, or perhaps not being hopeful enough. I wonder if anyone would like to sort of feedback from what we said about that towards the end.
Despair for me, or at least fear, is certainly a driving point for action. But I guess where does panic and fear come into despair? I guess despair is when you give up that your actions would do anything. Is that true? Yeah, I don't know. Well, what's despair mean for you, I guess?
It's interesting that you're not the first person to position despair as this kind of its ultimate end of some particular road. So a lot of people have kind of disavowed despair because it seems to be some ultimate stopping off point. But you mentioned panic or fear instead. Can you pick up a little bit on the role those emotions or those intellectual positions, if they are, like, play in your response to?
Well, I'd say that. So, in terms of the climate, my fear, my panic at the changes happening, drives me to want to take action and want to encourage others to take action. So I'm not, I guess, at the point yet where I have lost all hope, but I am despairing at the level of our action, and I'm despairing at the way humans react to situations. So despairing about the inaction. I'm also slightly despairing about the hope, because some people's hope seems to paralyse them from action. The fact that, oh, we'll be fine, it'll all be okay. There's all these solutions, which I think slows action down. So although hope can be a motivator and help you get out of bed in the morning, it can mean that you go to sleep without having acted.
Thank you so much for that. And actually very neatly moves us towards something I'd like to do to draw this section of the workshop to a close. Picking up on our last speaker's thought as well, would you just have a word with the person or people sitting next to you about how you respond to this quite famous quote from Greta Thunberg that I saw on a lot of children's placards today, or a version of it. Here is a suggestion here is food for thought about the role of hope in addressing the climate crisis. So just respond to that, please, with whoever's sitting next to you.
I was saying, isn't it, that hope, being hopeful leads to complacency. Fixes is one of the ways of making things can be fine. So, that's what she's about, this kind of thing she's saying.
Or how we get hopeful or despairing.
I really like the fact that she's just saying stuff that don't tell, don't use this way. We're happy to use
Okay, people, can I ask you to draw those conversations to a close? Thank you. Okay, let's move on to something else. So we started in the body. We started in the emotions and thinking about how we might address ethical issues connected to the environment from that starting point. But now we're moving to kind of the opposite extreme, which is we're going to investigate some of the kind of more rationalistic explorations of ethical issues connected to the environment. And then we're going to do that in a rather roundabout way, so humour me. Okay, I want to tell you about Ethics in the Environment 2. Okay, you're at Ethics in the Environment 1 right now. It's a free workshop, okay? Ethics in the Environment 2 will be our second workshop, okay? We want to run a second workshop. But in order for the second workshop to be sustainable, we're going to have to cover the room cost, about 40 quid, let's imagine, and the cost of some refreshments if we're going to try and feed people next time. Okay, we're imagining for the second workshop, let's just say 10 people are going to show up. So we sort of budget that if each of those people pay a £5, that'll cover everything plus a bit of food and drink. But we're not going to legislate for a particular cost or turn people away if they decide not to pay for whatever reason. So we decide that we're going to operate this new workshop, whenever it's going to be, on a pay-what-you-like basis. Okay? There's 2 tickets available for this event. There is a £5 ticket. Who's got the £5 tickets? Okay, you've all been given them. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, £5 ticket. Just show everyone those ones. Yeah. Or a free ticket. £5 ticket or a free ticket. Okay, so this is what they've been given. A free ticket or a £5 ticket. Yeah. So the people who are holding the tickets are just going to demonstrate for us how this works, right? Because 10 is a number that I can deal with in terms of percentages. So what these guys are going to do is they are going to decide personally whether they would like a £5 ticket or a free ticket, right? We're going to honour these tickets. If we get another workshop off the ground and you have a free ticket, if you have your name on the back of a free ticket, you're welcome to come to our ticket or pass it on to somebody who can attend for free. If you've got a £5 ticket, then you've got a place on our workshop, but you've got to pay a £5 when you come through the door, okay? If you haven't got any tickets at all, then you're not coming because we've only got space for 10, okay? So if it goes ahead, if we get it off the ground, then these tickets are as good as IOUs, guys, so they're hot stuff, right? I want you guys to decide whether you'd like a free ticket or a £5 ticket. Write your name on the appropriate ticket. Just retain the other one and give it to Elliott. He's going to collate them and he's going to do some mental maths to work out where we stand and who's voted for what. Okay, so the rest of us can just watch while they make their decisions. Just wait for it. Okay, so while Elliott is doing a bit of calculations about how this is going to, how things have gone, I'll just tell you a little bit more about the economics of this workshop. Ignore this. Ignore this, ignore this, ignore this. Okay, so this is the version of what's known as the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, it's an extremely pared down version of something known as the prisoner's dilemma. And this is how our prisoner's dilemma works. Okay, if all of these potential participants of the workshop, 100% of them, choose a £5 ticket, then the room costs are paid, we can go ahead, and there's enough money for refreshments. So that's a moderate benefit for everyone. Okay, great. It's not. If most of them, so if 70% of them choose a £5 ticket, but the rest choose a free ticket, that's still okay, right? The room costs are paid at least, so the workshop can go ahead, but we'll just do it, no refreshments. So that's a large benefit for the people who get a free ticket, and a slight harm for the people who get a £5 ticket because they're paying still a £5, but they're getting less for their ticket. If more than a few people, so more than 30%, choose a free ticket, we can't afford to cover the room and the session has to be cancelled. So that's a large harm for everybody. What should they do? What should these 10 people do? What would make sense? What would be rational for the people who have just voted to do you think? What? Let's say if I'm the people who didn't vote.
For everybody to pay £2.50.
Find a free event.
Yeah. Great feedback, guys. Yeah, but maybe the cost could be brought down a little. But what? Be mandatory that everyone pays it? Can we keep it? Pay what you like.
I think pay what you like the best.
Yeah, but if everyone pays £2.50, we don't cover the room cost. At least 80% have got to pay a £5. It's £40 the room cost.
But you'll have more than 10 people paying what?
Oh,
you're more likely to get a higher number of people putting money.
Okay, so we're living in a real world where we might get more than 10 people, I guess. Let's imagine there's 10 seats in this room, and that's the end of it. But that's brilliant and lateral and true. But
are they allowed to discuss before we can?
Okay, so maybe if they were allowed to do a bit of conferring, that would have been more helpful than each individually acting. Okay, so maybe when we do it the second time, which we will in a second, you can confer a bit about what you're going to plan to do and see if we can get a better result. Okay, but these guys have not had that opportunity. So anyone who manages to get a free ticket here, brilliant, but they've not had that chance to confer. Have you got the results?
The numbers are in. So 7 of you good people have chosen to pay a £5 ticket. 3 of you have decided to be freeloaders.
Brutal phrasing.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that means the workshop can go ahead, right? But it means it goes ahead without refreshments. Too bad. Bring packed lunch. Bring your own water. Okay. All right, great. So not a terrible result, but that's the second best option, right? That's a moderate benefit for everyone. The workshop goes ahead, but there's a large benefit for. There's a large benefit for those free riders. So well done to them. And there's a small harm for everyone else who foregoes their refreshments. Okay, brilliant.
What's the amount of pressure though, because we're all watching?
It's a horrible amount of pressure. And also not entirely anonymous, maybe, because maybe the person sitting next to you could see. If it's entirely anonymous, it might be a different result. Okay, so if you guys wouldn't mind vacating those seats, and let's get another 10 people sitting in those seats, and we'll see if we can do it again. And this time, maybe you might want to put forward some suggestions to people about voting. I don't know. You're the guy who suggested conferring. But yes, could you vacate those seats? And it means some of you guys need to fill them, please. Okay, so predictions. Are we going to get a large percentage of people paying a £5 this time? Especially in the knowledge that at least 3 people are coming to our next workshop, which will go ahead, and they're going to be coming for free. So there is a genuine option to come for free. Please be sure that you vote anonymously, okay? So don't show the person sitting next to you. Make sure that you don't show Elliott. Just hand him it folded over. So vote now, please. Have you got your vote now? Would you like to have a free ticket or a £5 ticket, new people? Yeah. It's quite maybe I can show it, but I'll just talk over what's happening. But it's really interesting what they do.
You can show their faces. Still getting it out.
Okay. So in the video, it's an economics lecture from Velasquez University, from a university in America whose name I've discovered I can't pronounce. And there's probably a couple of hundred students in the class, and they are economics students. So game theory is very well studied in economics, and those students should understand this better than me, being somewhat mathematically challenged as I am. And the first time they voted, and they were voting for points on a test, they would get extra marks. These were real marks to be allocated on top of the marks they'd earned for the end of year marks. So something real at stake. The marks, they tried, the marks on offer were significant enough for people to care about them, but not an absolutely enormous and exorbitant amount of extra marks, which I've tried to reflect, although we've had a good discussion about how that's difficult in the pricing in our version of it. But anyway, the first time they play, over 80% of students choose the equivalent of a free ticket, even understanding that would mean everybody loses the chance to get extra marks. So then they have explained to them what's happened, just like we have, and they get a second go. And the second time, 80 odd, so in the high 80s% of people elect to have the equivalent of a free ticket. So they do it a third time, and the third time in the 90s% of people elect to have a free ticket. So despite understanding it, they still seem to make what seems to be a confusing judgment. Shall we see what our group did? So what's the scores on the doors?
9 of you voted for pay private, 1 of you has decided to.
Okay, thank you very much. Interesting. Right, can you just talk to the person next to you for a second? There's a couple of things I'm interested to hear now. Is it Dana?
Dana, yeah.
Dana, sorry, I apologise. Dana, you've already raised a couple of interesting things about setting this up in this context, which you might want to share. But perhaps some other of you have got some reflections on this, what these results might mean, right? Would you like to say what you were saying to me?
So I think it depends on your socio-economic background. Like, although you might be benefiting, you could say that the person getting the free ticket is benefiting in the circumstances. Essentially, they probably haven't benefited that much anyways, and it's almost like a positive discrimination kind of thing where, we need to sort of help people out and move them along to encourage social mobility. For instance, in this scenario, to have this talk be like educational opportunity. So I guess in that sense, having a free ticket would help people from a different background. Although there's some people who can pay, and it's a sense of people who are poor should have high amounts of tax, whereas people who are richer should have a higher amount of tax to them because they have the money to be taxed on. It's that kind of, I suppose, belief.
Thank you, Dana. So it's quite, it's hard to set something that is sufficiently an incentive for people, and to make the loss felt a significant enough loss. But it's interesting to know that in most cases where there's been research done on this version of the prisoner's dilemma, here's another representation of it, overwhelmingly people seem to make self-interested decisions even where they understand that risks ruin for everybody. What on earth has any of this got to do with the climate crisis? Some people might be thinking, who thought they'd come to a climate workshop, and we're talking about free tickets for workshops that might never happen. This is what I'd like you to talk to the person next to you about, just for a second. What has this got to do with the climate crisis, if anything? speak in twos or threes if you have any thoughts about how this might connect to the questions we've come here to talk about. So, cows. So stay with me on this, please. So in 1965, which is just over 50 years ago, isn't it? I was just realising. The American biologist and philosopher Garrett Hardin resurrected a parable about grazing cows. And he found it in the 1833 work of the British economist William Foster Lloyd. And Lloyd was talking about common pasture lands, which was quite contemporaneous for the time that he was writing. So these are lands that are either shared, which is an easy way of thinking about it, or in some cases commonly owned. And then this parable focuses on this worrying phenomenon which occurs when some resources are shared by everyone, but the profits, or the benefits, depending on whether you want to think of it in economic terms, the benefits are privatised. So individuals enjoy those benefits, but the costs are shared by everyone. So in this story, farmers who graze cows on this common pasture, they share the grass, but each owns their own cow, right? And these cows represent an economic profit and probably some other value as well. Let's say they're 100 quid each, right, at market, these cows. I don't know what the going rate is for a cow, I'm afraid, but let's just imagine. This creates a strong incentive to graze as many cows as possible, because you could treble or quadruple your income by squeezing in an extra cow. But of course, the grass is finite. If too many cows graze, each cow gets less, and the pasture becomes degraded, and thereby it's providing less sustenance for whatever cows are left. And perhaps these skinny cows, maybe they're only worth 90 quid or 80 quid or something. But here's the really crucial consideration in this parable. By squeezing in one more cow, a farmer stands to gain another 90 quid, £90. But their neighbour, they just lose a fraction of the value of their herd, 10% say. The losses are shared by everyone. The benefits are enjoyed only by those who free ride. Right, this encourages anyone, so says the parable, any right-thinking person to squeeze in an extra cow. There's only one logical conclusion to such an arrangement, argues Hardin in his paper, The Tragedy of the Commons, and I've got a reference list at the end if you want to pick it up. The one logical conclusion he argues is ruin. The pasture land's unsustainable, it can't support any cows at all, and that's not just bad news for the cows, it's bad news for the farmers, it's bad news for everybody. The farmers lose everything in the end. And they must have known that on one level. So here's a little extract of from Hardin's paper, which talks, in his own words, which talks about this consequence. Freedom in a commons brings ruin to all. So this is the sort of central stimulus of the remainder of our workshop. And what I would like us to do is to go back to those groups that were in before, and your facilitator's got a question to start you off in processing and responding to this parable critically, if you like. You don't have to swallow that this is a parable that represents the situation currently. But what I would encourage you to do when you're in those groups is to first ask, what tragedy of the commons are there out there? You raised an amazing example of one. Maybe you would want to share that with everybody.
I mean, I think of it quite differently to this. I know this parable, and this comes from a particular kind of school of thinking to do with, which is very anti-collectivist. It's kind of part of the Austrian school, and that idea of, you know, owning anything in commons is bad because eventually people will become greedy and exploit it. I just don't agree with that fundamentally. But so I guess my example doesn't really relate to that.
Do you think your example that you gave was not a commons example, potentially? So you don't necessarily have to tap into the moral psychology of it to see how some of the things that you said might fit this model.
So I guess...
Do you want to tell people what it was?
Yeah,
and they can
I'll just say what I said. So I was talking about public transport, and I was saying I just really want public transport to be publicly owned and fully available and really affordable, because we all need to be incentivised to use it as much as possible and to not use personal transport when unless we absolutely have to. And I was saying at the minute, for me, it's cheaper for me to borrow my partner's car, drive it into town, pay for parking all day than it is for me to pay for a return bus ticket from Crooks into town and back. And I was like, that's wrong, that's stupid. I shouldn't be having to pay more for a service which ought to be better. And I was kind of saying, I think a lot of people probably would make the decision to use personal transport even if they know, it is contributing to congestion and localised pollution and climate change, but it's just more convenient for me in the short term to kind of nip into town in the car and park it and drive home again. It's kind of like, well, if everyone demanded better public transport and used it, then the council would have no other option but to properly invest in it, bring it back fully into public ownership or whatever the solution may be to kind of really ramp it up, make it better and make it available to everyone. So I think that would be, I know this is kind of utopian thinking, but that would be, not a tragedy of the commons, but a victory of the commons in that instance. So that's how I see it as being different from that parable, I suppose.
Sam, so you could explore whether you think there are any fitting, whether this is an analogy for any fitting circumstance that you're aware of at the moment. And you are very welcome to, like Sam has, to resist some of the assumptions that underlie this parable, if you want to, and if you can identify them. But what I'd like you to do is spend a bit of time in those groups to explore the question that your facilitator brings to the table. And if that doesn't float your boat, that question, propose one that does, and spend a bit of time on that together. And we'll have a bit of time at the very end to come together and just share some of those thoughts before we draw things to a close. Okay? So maybe a group over here, a group over there, and a group over there as previously.
Do you think people are self-interested who do this thing where they kind of rationalise everything on an individual basis, or do you reckon if people hold things in common, they will respect them and share them with each other?
I guess I try to be hopeful and say that people will look after the stuff that they hold in common if everyone needs it, relies on it. But I think there's obviously a massive school of thought, Hayek and all these other people who would argue that's not the case.
There's a school of thought that is predominant, and that the other school of thought that counteracts that, which is about people being able to cooperate with each other, and cooperation being innate and natural, and people wanting to help other people and all the rest of it, is not a dominant school of thought in society and universities, etc. So I think, I like you, I find it problematic if those things are seen to be, this is human nature. But actually, there's loads and loads of research to show that we as human beings are good at cooperating and working with each other and for each other.
So how apt or is a parable like this then? Sorry, Jenny, you would please say what you were going to say.
No, I was going to agree with you actually, and this idea that actually we are far more altruistic and cooperative. There's plenty of evidence, from biology and psychology to demonstrate that is the case. But we live in this society which has got a narrative of survival of the fittest and nature. Red in tooth and claw and all that sort of thing, and the kind of overhang of, unscientific social Darwinism. And I feel like, we really need to change that narrative. And one of the things is around taxation. You know, even the last Labour government talked about it as something that was not a good thing, or tried to kind of hide the fact that tax was necessary. And I just feel, you know, we do need to shift the story.
So in response to the question I sort of asked after you began speaking, was how apt is this parable, which 50 years ago was resurrected to try and capture something about population growth, actually. How apt is it in the case of the climate? It sounds like you're saying not very.
I think it is apt, but I also think there's a kind of, you know, there are other dimensions, like intergenerational ones. You know, I'm of an age where I might be having grandchildren at some point. You know, I feel, you know, there are altruism towards the next generation drives, could, you know, drive that sort of more, you know, generosity.
I think it is apt because this is a line that we've been fed for the last 40 years, you know, and actually I'd go further to say that it benefits people in certain positions of power if we do believe it, if we do all believe that we are atomised individuals with, you know, who are only self-interested and are only out to look after ourselves, and you know, it serves them because then they don't have to share in their wealth and, you know, consider us in you know, as their equals in a way. So I think it's an ongoing ideology, and it's been rolled out, you know, across many countries. It's affected economic policy for a long time now. But I think, to be honest, people are starting to get sick of it. I think it's you know, it's almost a state religion now, but it's starting to crumble, and I think we have to keep pushing back against it whenever you know, we're told that there's now what you can do, this is how it is, you know, this is how it's always been, because it's not the case. I mean, you're quite right when you said this parable was initially in reference to population growth, and it was a kind of belief that, you know, the commons only works as an idea up to a certain point, because over a particular capacity, then it's people, you know, the need to compete arises. But I think we just need to rethink. I mean, I don't know exactly what the solution is, because the population carries on growing and we have finite resources. But I guess that's where I'd ask someone else to maybe step in and suggest something, because I'm still thinking it through.
It seems that it's not.
Go for it. Theo and then Oliver. Yeah.
I was going to say that it seems that it's not only a personal ideology of sort of these people you're referring to, where these situations benefit them. And Jenny, as you said, this sort of survival of the fittest attitude is not only a personal ideology that some people have. It's a system, a sort of system of capitalism in a way, that we should pursue this constant growth, continued growth at the sake of all other things. And that quote to me seems to be almost a description of capitalism, that things should continue to grow and there should be a free market, and the idea that we should continue to pursue getting richer and bettering ourselves, whatever that means, but at the sake of the environment. These are that's the thing that the byproducts of this growth is that we're damaging our planet, and that's why this kind of parable is incredibly relevant.
Perhaps just sort of feeding off the capitalism thing. We were having a conversation earlier actually about how I'd never really linked it to the prisoner's dilemma before, but it was something like 30 years ago ExxonMobil had climate experts in their boardroom giving them a speech on what oil extraction and CO2 could do to the planet. So they made that decision then to disregard the evidence and take the oil for their personal gain, which is sort of quite a good link. And yeah, we're in a world driven by one number, and it's the profit, just like sort of the farmers were, and the ultimate cost is never considered. It's just how much profit can we take, kind of thing.
Do you think if you're upwardly mobile, that's an ideology that can seem quite appealing, the kind of more, I want more, whereas if, you know, it reaches a point I'm quite kind of downwardly mobile in my kind of economic journey, and it's actually
made me think very differently about these things. And I think now we're looking at a point where we have, you know, a record kind of period of real wage stagnation and a generation that's dying younger and earning less than the last one. We're going to see a real, you know, just a real kind of sweeping change in the way that people view these things.
Can I ask you just to kind of focus your attention on one element of the example that you gave? Now, I really hear that you didn't characterise your use of personal transport at the detriment of the environment as an example of the commons, though some people would use it in that way. You might think that the use of personal transport is not an economic benefit in every example. Sometimes it's a convenience benefit or some other form of benefit. So just to push back slightly on the characterising this purely in economic terms, do you think that ruin is the destination when we come to the personal benefits of non-economic sorts? Are individuals incentivised to put their own convenience first when the consequences of them doing that will be distributed among a large population and hardly felt? Does that create an incentive for people to just enjoy those benefits that are non-economic, maybe? Or do some of the arguments that have already been given still apply about people's ability to somehow...
I think a lot of the costs are actually not communicated well, so people actually don't understand the costs, and they might be long-term as well, like externalities, or affecting people that they're not associated with. So I think the costs are very poorly communicated. There's low awareness of it, which probably influences people to continue acting in the way that they do without understanding the costs of it fully.
Because the cost is so diffuse,
yeah.
It's impossible to visualise the thing as a whole, so you don't feel the immediate effects in the instant.
And also maybe like intentionally hidden in some cases. You know, corporations don't want the consumer to learn about the costs, so it's in their interest.
Thank you very much for that.
So, I think talking about economic and non-economic benefits that are connected. So, the person that has the extra cow and gets the extra money will have, I guess, more status because they've got that funding behind them. But I was thinking, well, there's also those things about resentments and jealousies and all that sort of thing. So I was thinking, well, another rational response in a way is if you were of the lesser cow contingent, why don't you just shoot your neighbour's cows? You know, so the person that puts the extra cow on, you just shoot the cow. I mean, I suppose compassion for the cow might stop you from shooting the cow, but what's the fate of these cows anyway? But I suppose what stops you is kind of your knowledge that it's against the law, and also there's, I suppose, an age-old experience of what this kind of revenge type thing brings about. So if the same thing applied to the environment, so people thought, well,
you slash people's tyres or something.
We've got to make strict laws about putting extra cows on here. Then that's a way of dealing with the tragedy of the commons. And also, if you thought that degrading the environment was as serious an issue as actually murdering someone else's property or stealing someone else's property, then the law would be supported by a sort of strong feeling. The question that for me is, well, could that kind of international agreement or agreement on a small scale even come about through democratic means? So you get the situation in, where was it, Australia, where there was a party running high in the polls. They had a great or a reasonable environmental policy. The other party, the Conservatives or whatever, trashed this policy, and they won the election. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, there's a poll of sort of young people under 25, and something like 60% said they'd rather the army took over. So, are you looking to authoritarianism to solve the climate change crisis? Or does it have to come through democracy? And if it comes through democracy, how do you get this sort of overarching narrative so that everybody's on board with it and they can introduce legal mechanisms to...
As Steve was speaking then, I've just put up a slide which is a quote from the same paper, and one of Hardin's proposals is this. So he says a couple of things. Maybe it's on the next slide. The thing I want to share with you is he says the solution is mutual coercion, mutually agreed upon by the people whom it affects. So still thinking in this very legislative way, and still thinking about people in this atomistic, self-interested way, which are very incisive to observe. But so it sounds slightly different from this kind of like totalitarian, somebody just needs to take over and do it. But it also seems hopeful that at least legislators who represent people could come and consent to mutually coercing one another by law to behave in ways that wouldn't lead to ruin. Well, I mean, what do you make of that as a... Sorry.
You get a situation where, say, countries who are developing would say, well, why should we make sacrifices when it's the West that's created this problem? And we resent you putting a brake on our development when it's up to you. So a rational thing to do in a way would be, okay, we'll fund you, the developing countries, to develop equally efficient, sustainable technologies in order to compete with us. But then you have to go back to your population and say, will you vote so that we fund these other countries? And that's where the whole prisoner's dilemma thing is.
So Rosie and then...
I think this is going back a couple of steps and to the cow, really. But there's something about relationships, like you said about the person putting the extra care on, and there's a kind of inherent sense of that they're greedy or that they're trying to take more. But actually, we don't know anything about that person. That, it might be that everyone else is saying, well, they're a single parent with 7 children, so they probably need an extra cow. We just don't know those facts. And on the micro level, humans, we are social beings. We do connect with those closest to us and care more about them. That's the nature of our biological experience, and we can also act beyond that. And but at that there's people who foster children who aren't their own children, but the system has had to be set up that those people are paid by the system to do that. So there's clearly a failing, isn't there, of that we don't. It appears that humans don't just say, well, actually, we'll take you in. Do you see what I mean? We do draw a line around our closest, and so something about from the micro and how we build relationships, and something about relationships to bring into the macro to say, how do we develop this change, is about relating to each other as human beings and not just being part of a system. But I'm not very clear on it.
Well, what you said, it kind of, I think, leads on to what I was going to say, and I was going to talk about, just briefly, about the book The Spirit Level by Wilkinson and Pickett, which is a book where they've amassed a huge amount of sociological and economic research looking at different countries and on all sorts of measures, mental health, physical health, well-being generally. Countries where there is the least amount of equity inequity in the society are the ones that do best on things like mental health and all of those measures. And I would want to press that book into the hand of every politician as they go through the House of Commons for the first time, because it seems like such a fundamentally important way of, going back to shifting the narrative, away from this idea that actually, selfish actions make us happy, and we are, it's the way of the world that we should be out for ourselves, to actually recognizing that it is not only, a nice idea, but it is actually statistically the case that in those societies, say Denmark, and, but the societies that are least inequitable actually have the most flourishing populace.
Always higher on the Personal Development Index. They're all up there, aren't they? Norway, Sweden, Denmark.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to romanticise those countries because obviously there are issues, but Denmark has shifted radically to low energy, alternative energy methods, and people have got out of their cars, and there are many. So if you have that idea of a collective good, and change the narrative from one of greed to sharing. Yeah, and relationship, exactly that.
And that's also cultural, isn't it? Because we're talking here in the UK from a very Western individualistic. We're one of the most individualistic countries, and Australia is, because we've given them that culture as well, and North America in the world. And there are communitarian cultures all over the world that are really different, where people talk about we rather than I, and they grow up talking about we, not just I. So I think that's also part of it.
I do agree with what you said about if there is a need, if the family needs an extra cow or an extra car in this case because they've got, a larger, number of children to care for, elderly relatives, and, by all means they should have those things. I think what I was pushing back against was this idea of, this kind of greed, the idea of I want another cow or another car simply because I can, or because my neighbour has one, so why shouldn't I? I think maybe I like what you said about coercion and the idea of, well, maybe we can, engineer a way of making this kind of multiple car ownership or multiple cow ownership thing less sexy, less desirable. Start by banning Jeremy.
Coercion's quite an unpleasant word.
Yeah, but you could start by banning Jeremy Clarkson, for instance, and just this idea of bigger, faster, more polluted cars are a good thing, and you should, desire these things. That's got to go. And maybe that's a good place to start, rather than just outright kind of banning it and, bringing in the army. But, I mean, if it comes to it, then, maybe it will be necessary.
Can I respectfully invite you just to leave it there for the time being, and we'll reform the circle, because we're almost out of time. Sorry to stop you full flow, but thank you. Let's make a circle again, folks, as soon as you're ready. We ended up disputing whether the situation that we find ourselves in is a tragedy of the commons, and also we drilled into a little bit what some of the underlying assumptions might be behind Garrett Hardin's use of this parable in describing, as he was, population growth. And there was some pushback, really interesting pushback against some of those underlying assumptions about the nature of human beings and what it is to live a good life. Is there anyone from our group who feels like they could say a sentence or two about what some of our, not that everyone felt the same thing, but there was some resistance to this, to what Gareth Hardin might be implying about human nature? Would someone have a batch? Will you? Would you take this guy?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we were questioning the idea that the narrative that humans are selfish, and we were kind of suggesting that actually there's a lot of evidence that human beings are actually altruistic and compassionate, and so the pushback was really against this idea of the social Darwinism, nature red in tooth and claw, and that's how human beings are, which is like a sort of rationalisation of capitalism. And we were also talking a little bit about the possibility of developing other narratives which are much more much more about generosity and sharing. And we also brought in the idea that there are other societies who are less I. I think you were saying that some societies think in terms of we collectively, and how we can actually pick up on that and go with it, really.
Thank you for encapsulating. Was a lot said. That was really great. Did Jane's group, did you end up speaking about this question or something else?
No, we didn't talk about this question.
Okay, brilliant. What did you talk about? Will you maybe invite somebody to say something about what came up in your group? Or maybe you would like to say something.
So we started, David asked whether, he said that the thought experiment that we did would have been much more interesting if we knew why different people said different things. And so then we started talking about whether they were like generalisable human nature idea and whether it could be used for kind of good or evil. Yang, do you want to explain what we talked about?
We talked about that.
Sorry.
I think one other thing that was added as well, there was a distinction made towards the end between sort of top-down ways of intervening, through policy, through legislation, and differences that are made bottom-up, which have more to do with the reasons why you'd vote than legislating patterns in ways you can vote. Did we get much further than that?
No, I feel like we were thinking about a lot of ideas, but we were struggling to hone down on like how to make progress on them, which I think is just the issue, really. It's really difficult.
Yeah. And I'll let you off, given that you had 20 minutes.
Does anyone else want to?
One point about
the
lies and the misinformation, and that's all. That is, and what that's putting people into a sense of fear and vulnerability, and that's, for me, what is existing right now.
Does that affect people's decision making?
Yes. Oh, tremendous.
Okay. Thank you. Elliott? Is there anything?
Does anyone want to feedback from the group? I think there were some really good discussions, or I can sum up and people can correct me.
Feel free to sum up it.
Yeah, I'll sum up briefly if you like. So we talked about quite a few things actually. There were some really good points made, but one of the main sort of points, in my opinion, was sort of the really questioning Garrett Hardin's logic of what the people in the commons are like and where the commons extends to. So there was a really good point I think made about that we all sort of agreed on, I think, which was that people aren't all in the commons equally, and it's all well and good in the analogy of the cow farmers where everyone has one or two cows and there's one piece of pasture land that they can all access equally, but that's really not how the tragedy of the commons is reflected today, especially when we imagine that there are something like 10 company or 100 companies which are contributing 70% of everything, and you compare that to someone who can't afford to even catch the bus or catch the train. It's quite repellent, really, to imagine that they have the same position in the commons. And so that might be one of the flaws with Garrett Hardin's analogy. We wondered whether it was perhaps completely applicable. Does anyone else have anything to, or anyone want to tell me I'm wrong?
Another point that we had, I think, raised was how the world is so complex. So we are experiencing a tragedy of the commons with the climate crisis, but it's not just, it's many tragedies within many commons within the commons.
Okay, we are almost out of time. What I would like you to do is we won't, or maybe we will because we've got the space. Let's show again where we find ourselves at just this moment in time on this continuum between hope and despair, and grab the ear of someone you find nearby and just share one thought about hopefulness or lack of hopefulness that has been raised for you today in this workshop. So stand up, move and chat.
You're going to be the other spectrum as somebody that goes
despair is still an odd one for me. I don't think I would ever say, I suppose occasionally I'll go, I despair of this situation I'm in, and that kind of means I've given up. That's literally, I can't think of a way out of it. I still think that's despair.
Is this similar to what you've been thinking?
Yeah, I think so, but I've moved further away from hope because I think you can still work with despair. So that was what was putting me off beforehand. Like you said, you would then, despair would lead to inaction or breakdown kind of thing. But actually, maybe...
Will it take despair for people to actually shift their arses and get into gear?
Yeah.
Do you seriously think that? Do we have to be pushed to the extreme?
Yeah, I don't know. That sounds... maybe not. That would perhaps push us... I don't know. How far until it's a point of no return? And despair might be no return. But I suppose this thing of optimism that we were speaking about, yeah, as long as there's optimism, maybe we can reach despair.
So, if you read the little leaflet that you might have seen in order to alert you to this workshop happening tonight, you will have noticed that I mentioned on it that this is a pilot for what we would hope would be a series with a few more parts of workshops on ethical issues that connect to the environment. And it was generously, elements of the workshop, including the filming, have been funded by Bristol University, and as part of that funding we agreed to get some really good quality feedback from participants at this pilot that would help us assess any interest in future events and also shape them to meet people's needs, and which is why I put aside specific time for a bit of feedback rather than asking people to stay back at the end. So we're about to do that for a few moments. I just want to alert you to a couple of announcements and a few things before I let you do that, and then we'll sort of finish as and when you finish your form after that. These are our contact details. Feel free to get in touch or to find out more about the other work we do this way. There is, Rosie would like to make an announcement. Before she does, hang on, I'll just... Charlie is going to take a couple of talking heads of anybody willing to answer one or two of the following questions. What's been the most important issue for you raised by this evening? And what, if anything, do you see as the value of public philosophy like this? So if you're willing to chat to Charlie downstairs, you'll just film me for maybe 2 minutes, and you wouldn't find that toe-curlingly awful, then please do, because we'll find that really useful in the final film. You don't have to. Rosie has an announcement about an upcoming event, and I have an announcement, and then fill in your forms and you are free. So go for it, Rosie.
So not on the theme of the environment specifically, but if you enjoy this kind of philosophising, I run the Sheffield Philosophy in the Pub group, and we meet on the first Monday of the month at the Dog and Partridge Pub on Sheffield Lane, 7:45 to 8 p.m. And the email is sheffieldpip, so philosophy in pub, sheffieldpip@gmail.com.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Announcement?
Could I make
Yeah, go for it.
So that sounds fantastic. Mine's more environmentally specific. So I see a few familiar faces, but also not so many. I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion Sheffield, and we have a massive, huge, amazing fundraiser all tomorrow. So if anyone would like to come and get involved, raise some money for Extinction Rebellion and just meet like-minded people, obviously I'm sure you all are really caring about this issue. There's an event at Dina tomorrow from 4 in the afternoon, I think, until 4 a.m. So it'll be all sort of crafty in the afternoon and family friendly, and then a bit crunky and more sort of, tricky near the end.
And crafty still.
Yeah.
4 a.m. crafting.
Come down to London on the 7th of October for Extinction Rebellion.
Thank you. And Extinction Rebellion meet here on Mondays?
Monday evening.
At 7?
Between, 6 o'clock for a communal meal, and then 7
Brilliant. One more thing, a person who wanted to be here today but wanted me to tell you that the philosopher John McMurray, there's a seminar about his work at Sheffield Quaker Meeting House on Saturday the 12th of October, 10 till 4. So if that floats your boat, John McMurray seminar, Quaker Meeting House, Saturday the 12th of October, 10 till 4. But my contribution really was to bring people together. And it's very good represented, and then mostly Americans who turned out in the end. So it's been a great collection of stuff. It could have been better knowing what I know now. I'm sure everyone would say that. So one of the things I suggested doing very early on is that we had an open call.
Okay, so I found it really interesting talking to people about the difference between a top-down approach to a bottom-up approach to action against the climate crisis. The point of public philosophy is to promote action in the community, to get people thinking about how to be a good person and to use that to make their community and the wider world a better place.
I think the most important issue for me was about whether people are inherently selfish. And I suppose that relates to the climate crisis in that, will people always just do what's convenient or best for them and solve the environment? And people were saying that actually perhaps that's a learned behaviour. People have always been told that survival of the fittest is the way that you should live your life. We live in a capitalist society. And I hadn't really considered that before, so that was really interesting for me. I think as the sort of thinking space organisation set out at the start, philosophy is discourse. It's interacting with other people and discussing ideas with other people. It's not simply reading or being told about something philosophical, and it's the sort of collaboration when people have different ideas and they bounce off each other and develop those ideas. That's why public philosophy is important.
The most important issue raised today was that although when presented with all the information people can make the best decision for a community, there's often a lack of understanding of the parameters of the conditions, and that can lead to selfish choices, which in the case of climate change is leading to selfish actions which are ruining the world. And I think that coupled with a lack of understanding of how limited the time availability is leading to the problems we're seeing. And related to today's lecture about the destruction of the commons, or the ruin of the commons.
I think there were many useful issues, but probably to think in terms of society and generalising how we behave as human beings, making that link to how we might or might not be able to affect change in our environment, on the planet. It was really interesting. Public philosophy is something that everybody should have. It should be prescribed on the NHS because without it you just can live in a bubble, your own bubble which you feel maybe safe within, but you're not challenged therefore to think maybe about others or how to extend and deepen and broaden your thinking. So it's, I would say, essential to do that and to think more critically, and to also be able to socially feel that you can disagree with people, and that's okay, because we all find that we're in this situation where we get very angry if somebody says something that's different to us, and people can become very tribal, when actually disagreeing is a healthy thing as long as you can give a reason for why that is, and explain it with care and in a thoughtful way, and caring about the person you're disagreeing with and their feelings too. So philosophy in the community can only be of benefit to us all.